Welcome back, everybody. I have a wonderful special guest with me today, Chris Gheysens. He's the CEO of Wawa. Chris, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on to chat with us.
Absolutely, Sue. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And Chris, I'm going to tell everybody I'm not going to do the traditional, you've got 1,000 shops, you're worldwide, you've built with your Wawa family this unbelievable institution. I'm not going to say, all right, I am going to say, which I tell you every time, I'm sure you hear this over and over again, that I like my comfort food is that meatball
Oh yeah,
shorty.
meatball
Sorry.
shorty's a favorite.
Yep, there we go again. So sorry, I can't help myself.
That's
So,
good.
but I want to talk about you, because the way I know you is, as you know, we served together with the chamber. You ran the CEO Council for Growth, with major CEOs. I ran the chamber at the same
Yep.
time, and we happened to serve during COVID.
Right.
And all I have to say about you, Chris, is you stepped up big time for our
Yeah.
city and region. I mean, you do
Thank you.
anyhow,
Yeah. You did
Um,
too. You did too. You had bigger shoes there, so I followed
well,
your lead.
I appreciate that. But you really were terrific, and we worked closely together and did some really important things
Did.
for the city. So thank you, Chris. And so really all I want to ask you, and actually one other thing I really want to say about you is that I think you're very much, tell me if I'm wrong, but about being a leader who empowers others. And I read somewhere you have like, was it Chief Goose or something? Your Wawa logo is a goose on your business card.
Yeah, lead Goose. Yes. So
Lead
the
Goose,
Wawa,
lead
as you
goose.
see behind above me, Goose is our company logo. It's tied to the word Wawa and its history. And yeah, I'm the type, Sue, that CEO is, a little boring and lead Goose is much more fun. So yes, that I have a lot of fun with that title. People love
Well, yeah, I don't know if I could put lead goose on my business card, but I do. I love that you do that. And I also, and you've told me this, is that, you believe that you work for your employees.
it.
I mean, how cool is that? I totally say that all the time. I say the people who work with me are so much better than I am. But I think that again embodies who you are. So that was a
Thank
very long introduction, but that's
you.
how I feel about you and why I asked you to join me here today. And so, Chris, tell us, like, when did you, when was that moment when you decided to bet on yourself?
Hmm. Well, I think, you know this, Sue, and probably the genesis maybe of your podcast here. I think leaders and individuals in their career are often faced with opportunities where they're betting on themselves, as you would say. And I think there was one moment in particular that, frankly, was probably most important to my career. And that was a time, it was the last of a very long process and series of interviews where the Wawa board of directors, about 12, 13 years ago, was actually a little more than that now, was selecting their next CEO. And it
Hmm.
was me and another individual internally. And they
The
had
chief,
one
chief
last,
goose? The chief goose. Is that who they were selecting?
that's right. Yep. Lead Goose.
Lead goose.
And so we had been through a process. They said there's one more interview, and they gave us a few questions to consider. One of those questions was, what do you do if you don't get this role?
Mm.
And as you would think in those types of situations, I'm bouncing off ideas off of coaches and people that I respect, other CEOs at the time. And the general advice was to tell them that you're going to leave, that you wanted to put pressure on the board to make them think, boy, if we lose Chris, that would be bad, and it should be a feather in his cap to getting the role. And I remember going to bed the night before, and it just stuck with me that didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like who I was, because that really wasn't the truth. It was an organization I had been with at that point 15 years, a place that I loved culturally, values wise, was a wonderful fit. And so I literally changed the answer in the room when I was asked. And it was very different than I'm going to leave. It was, this decision that you have is frankly much more important than just myself and the other guy and what we do and what our careers are about. It's about a business that's been in place for 200 years at that point. It's about a set of employees and associates, as we call them, a culture and a values. It's something very special in the marketplace. Frankly, the decision of what I do or what the other guy does shouldn't really drive your decision. It's really about what's best for the organization, what's best for the future. And if I can play a role in that in any way, shape, or form, whether I'm chosen or not, that's what I want to do because that's why I'm here.
Oh,
The answer
wow.
went something like that, but it was really, I think, as this goes, a bet on me being true to myself and my values because that's how I felt.
And
Um,
what happened was,
well,
you say that, but what happened is that they saw you say, it's not about me,
yeah,
that I
you got
care
it.
about the culture and what you built, which is authentic. You weren't, you said that from your gut. How
Mhm.
often do you go with your gut when you like make those kind of decisions? Because that,
Yeah.
of course they chose you, right?
Look, I'm a CFO by trade. So people would say, well, Chris is an evidence and a data and a quant guy. And I am, but I've learned in this role, instinct and gut aligned to your values. And you use the word your authentic self. That's the
Mhm.
most important thing. So I learned later, sometime later, that answer to that question was the sole factor in choosing me to be the next CEO.
Oh,
So
wow.
I bet on myself, and it had a pretty profound impact on certainly me and my career.
It's interesting because you're also talking about, you were probably talking with some very sophisticated folks who gave you advice. And there are times when you want to take that advice.
Yeah,
And then there are times when you factor it into who you are. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
that's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Do you, is there, was there a time when you're like, ooh, I shouldn't, I mean, going with your gut all the time isn't always the greatest thing to do. Like, how do you, again, is it more just so you have a lot of
Yeah.
perspective, but for a lot of people who are tuning in, they're looking for you to say, hey, and here's an example where you bet on yourself, but sometimes it's like, I bet on myself, but maybe it didn't work so well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how do you sort of thread that needle?
Yeah. It's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I would tell you, I think it starts with knowing who you are,
Mm.
having really high emotional intelligence, understanding the situation, and making sure almost always you can bet on yourself. But it depends on the type of decision. It depends on the bet and using that language. Is that a two-way door or a one-way door? Big decisions where you're walking through a door that closes behind you, you probably want more facts, more data, more outside brought in to that discussion and to that decision. Oftentimes, when it's a two-way door, a decision that, even if it's a big one, that you can walk back if it's the wrong decision. A lot of companies, Wawa, we can get paralyzed in trying to get perfect information, perfect insight to make big decisions. Sometimes you have to go with what's right. And I think oftentimes for me, it's anchored in your values, anchored in the culture of the organization and seeking alignment there. I tell people, Sue, that, it's really hard. I struggle having a good memory at times. It's easy for when I'm aligned, my private voice, my inner voice is aligned with my public outer voice. That to me is the definition of being authentic. That's when things feel right. And you never have to try to remember what you said because it's anchored in who you are and your values. That's when I tell people, go find an organization, go find a role where you can be your authentic self, where your values are aligned. And when that happens, that alignment of your private inner voice and your public outer voice will happen all the time. That's when you're your best self. That's when you can bet on yourself. When you find that out of alignment, you might be in the wrong place, or you might just have a set of values that don't align in the role you're in. Um, but being authentic is really the magic. And if there's
Mm.
any advice, any insight, you got to find out who you are. I tell, young associates here at Wawa, you got to go through a journey. I've been in this role for almost 14 years. I've been at Wawa for 27 years. And it's still a journey to make sure you're solidifying and nurturing your own values and your own principles. And when you find that, holding them true, and making sure when you're making big decisions, you're anchoring that, but bringing in the right level of information all the time. There's been plenty of times I bet on my gut in business, and I've been wrong. But I knew why I did that. And like I said, you can backtrack at times or you can seek forgiveness and pivot. And I think as long as you're open to that, I think things work out. But you started this podcast with, I think, the most important thing. You got to surround yourself with people you trust. And when
Mm.
you do that, that are expert and people that you trust, you start taking bets on that community that you've put around yourself, and that's a multiplier effect that I think makes decisions, make business, makes values, makes culture just better in the long run.
I love it. And Chris, the other thing that came through to me, and I'm not surprised, is that you just said you made mistakes, you admit it, you're not afraid to make mistakes. And I think that's really important too. I think is a value of yours from what I'm hearing, is to, that's part of who you are. And not everybody can do that.
Yeah, I think part of why I'm in the role I'm in and our culture is there's a large dose of humility. We have up the street from where we are in our campus, the Servant Leadership Training Center. We teach and train through customized training every leader throughout the organization a set of principles that are founded in servant leadership. And it's a style of leadership without going in depth that isn't based on you being a leader for leader's sake. It's based on you creating followership, for you putting people first. And really, like you started here, it's about me having the idea and the thought and the belief that I wake up every day working for 47,000 Wawa associates. My job is to make their job easier because we're in the service business. I'm not serving customers here in our corporate office. We're going to serve 2 million customers today across 1,100 Wawa stores. How can I make that, which is our core reason why we exist, a better, easier, more effective process for all the Wawa associates doing that today? That's just how we work, how we think. And it's why I answered that question back in that interview years ago that way. It's just who I am as well. And believing and knowing when you're right is a part of it, and admitting when you're wrong is equally a big part of it. You got to be, at the end of the day, the best compliment I get is when I leave a store. Tomorrow, I'll be in a bunch of Wawa stores, touring, visiting, talking with associates, understanding how life is in a Wawa, what we can do better, what's working, what's not. When I leave that store and I hear from those associates, wow, he's just one of us.
Mm.
That's what makes me get up out of bed every day. I never want to be that leader, that CEO that is, wow, he's the rock star CEO, or he's that one that's up here and we're down here. That's just now how I operate. And I don't think that's what engages the population of service workers like we have here at Wawa as well.
So, Chris, thank you for being one of us.
Thank you.
Right? We really appreciate you and your leadership and the way you lead and your values. So I can't
Thanks.
thank you enough for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Great seeing you.
Okay.